With the first light, another high tide almost setting. With the first light, another high tide almost setting, we left the cave. I did not look up at those standing quietly on the ledge, or at the flute player playing for them, but paddled fast out into the morning sea. Nor did I look back. I suppose this cave once had a name, I said to Rontu, who was as glad to be free as I was. But I have never heard of it or heard it spoken about. We will call it Black Cave, and never in all our days go there again. When we came back from our voyage to Tall Rock, I hid the canoe in the cave below the headland. It was hard work, but each time I would lift the canoe from the water and onto the ledge, even though I planned to go out the next morning. 2 hours had come and gone, and the Aleut hunters had not returned. Yet during these days I always looked for them. At dawn, as Rontu and I went down the cliff, I would watch the ocean for their sails. The summer air was clear, and I could see many leagues. Wherever we went in the canoe, I would never be gone longer than half a day. On the way home, I always paddled close to shore and looked for them. It was the last time we went to Tall Rock that the Aleuts came. I had hidden the canoe and climbed the cliff with the 10 cormorant skins over my back. I had hidden the canoe and climbed the cliff with the 10 cormorant skins slung over my back. At the top of the cliff, I stood for a while gazing at the sea. There were some small clouds on the water. One of them, the smallest, did not look like the others, and as I watched, I saw that it was a ship. The sun made bright scales on the water, but I could see clearly. There were 2 sails, and it was a ship coming toward the island. For a long time I could not tell the colour of the sails. I wondered if it could be the white men, though now I had thought about them little, and seldom looked for them. I left the cormorants hanging on the fence and went to the rock on the headland. I could see no better from the rock because the sun was low and the whole ocean was covered with light. Then as I stood there, I remembered that the white men's ship would come from the east. This one had come from a different direction, from the north. I still was not sure that it belonged to the Aleuts, but I decided to pack the things which I would take to the cave in the ravine. There was much to take. My 2 birds, the skirt I had made, the stone utensils, my beads and earrings, the cormorant feathers, and all of my baskets and weapons. The abalones were not yet dry, so I would have to leave them. When I had packed everything and put it beside the hole under the fence, I went back to the headland. I lay on the rock so I would not be seen, and peered over its rim toward the north. For a moment I did not find the ship, and then I saw it had travelled faster than I thought it would. It was already rounding the kelp bed, close to the rocks of Coral Cove. The last of the sun shone on the ship, on the bow, which was made like the beak of a bird, and on the 2 red sails. I knew that the Aleuts would not come on shore in the dark, and that I had until morning to carry my things to the cave, but I did not wait. Most of the night I worked, making 2 trips to the cave. At dawn, when everything had been moved, I went back to the house for the last time. There I buried the ashes of my fires and threw sand over the shelves and the floor. I took down the shelves I had put up. That I had put up to scare the gulls, and tossed them and the abalones over the cliff. At last, with a pelican wing, I brushed away the marks of my feet. When I had finished, it looked as though no one had lived there for a long time. By now the sun was up, and I climbed onto the rock. The ship lay at anchor on the cove. Canoes were bringing goods to the shore, and some were out in the kelp beds, beginning to hunt for otter. There was a fire on the shore, and beside it a girl. She was cooking something, and I could see the fire shining on her hair. I did not stay long on the headland. Always in the past I had gone to the ravine by a different way, so as not to wear a trail. This time I went off toward the west, along the cliff, and then doubled back through the brush, being careful to leave no tracks. Rontu's prints did not matter because the Aleuts knew that there were dogs on the island. The cave was very dark, and I had trouble getting Rontu to go through the small opening. Only after I had crawled in and out several times would he follow me. I closed the opening with stones, and since I was tired, lay down and slept all that day. I slept until I could see the stars shining between the cracks in the rock. I did not take Rontu with me when I left the cave that night, and I closed the opening so that he would not follow me, for if the Aleuts had brought their dogs, he would surely smell them out. I went quickly through the brush to the headland. Before I had climbed to the top of the high rock, I could see the glow of the Aleut fires. They had camped on the mesa at the place and the spring they had used before. It was less than half a league from my cave. I stood for a long time watching the fires, wondering if I should move to another part of the island, perhaps to the cave where the wild dogs lived. I was not afraid that the men would discover me, because they worked on the beach or hunted in their canoes all day. It was the girl I was afraid of. The ravine was tangled with brush, which was hard to walk through, but in the ravine grew seeds and roots. Sometimes when she was out looking for food, she might wander by the spring and see that it was being used and find my steps leading to the cave. I stood on the rock until the Aleut fires died. I thought of everything I could do, of the different places I could go, and at last decided to stay in the ravine. The far end of the island had no springs, and if I moved there, I would have no place to hide the canoe which I might need. I went back to the cave and did not leave it until the moon was full. There was little food left. Rontu and I climbed to the headland, and when we passed the house, I saw that 3 of the whale ribs had been cut from the fence. No one was there, or else Rontu would have barked. I waited until the tide was low, which was close to dawn, and filled a basket with seawater and abalones. We were back in the cave before it grew light. The seawater kept the abalones fresh, but when we had to go out again, the night was too dark to find our way to the reef. I therefore had to gather roots. I could never gather many before the sun rose, and I went out every morning until the next moon came. Then I went to the reef for abalones. During all this time I saw none of the Aleuts, nor did the girl come near the cave, though I found her footsteps far down the ravine, where she had been to dig roots. The Aleuts had not brought their dogs, which was fortunate, for they would have found Rontu's tracks and followed us to the cave. The days were long for Rontu and me. At first he would pace up and down the cave and stand at the opening, sniffing through the cracks. I did not let him out except when I was with him, for fear he would go to the camp and not come back. After a while he got used to this and would lie all day and watch whatever I was doing. It was dark in the cave, even when the sun was high, so I burned the small fish I had stored. By their light I began to make a cormorant skirt, working every day on it. The 10 skins I had taken at Tall Rock were now dry and in condition to sew. All of them were from male cormorants, whose feathers are thicker than those of the females and much glossier. The skirt of yucca fibres was simple to make. I wanted this one to be better, so I cut the skins carefully and sewed them with great care. I made the bottom first, putting the skins end to end and using 3 of them. For the rest of the skirt I sewed the others along their sides, so that the feathers ran one way in the upper part and a different way along the bottom. It was a beautiful skirt, and I finished it on the day after the second moon. I had burned all of the little fish, and since I could catch no more until the aleuts left, I took the skirt outside to work on it there. I had found footsteps in the ravine twice again after the first time, but no closer to the ravine, no closer to the cave. I had begun to feel safe, for the winter storms would soon be here and the aleuts would leave. Before another moon they would be gone. I had never seen the skirt in the sunlight. It was black, but underneath were green and gold colours, and all the feathers shimmered as though they were on fire. It was more beautiful than I had thought it would be. I worked fast now that it was almost finished, yet from time to time I would stop to hold it against my waist. "Rontu," I said, feeling giddy with happiness, "if you were not a male dog, I would make you one too, as beautiful as this." Rontu, who was sprawled out at the mouth of the cave, raised his head and yawned at me and went back to sleep. I was standing in the sunlight, holding the skirt to my waist, when Rontu leapt to his feet. I heard the sound of footsteps. It came from the direction of the spring, and as I turned quickly, I saw a girl looking down at me from the brush. My spear stood beside the mouth of the cave within easy reach. The girl was not more than 10 paces from me, and with one movement I could have picked up the spear and thrown it. Why I did not throw the spear I do not know, for she was one of the aleuts who had killed my people on the beach of Coral Cove. She said something, and Rontu left the mouth of the cave and walked slowly towards her. The hair raised on his neck, but then he walked to where she stood and let her touch him. The girl looked at me and made a motion with her hands, which I took to mean that Rontu was hers. "No," I cried and shook my head. I picked up my spear. She started to turn, and I thought that she was going to flee back through the brush. She made another motion, which I took to mean that Rontu was now mine. I did not believe her. I held the spear over my shoulder, ready to throw. "Tutok," she said, pointing to herself. I did not say my name. I called Rontu, and he came back. The girl looked at him and then at me and smiled. She was older than I, but not so tall. She had a broad face and small eyes that were very black. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth were worn down from chewing seal sinew, but they were very white. I was still holding the cormorant skirt, and the girl pointed to it and said something. There was one word, Wincha, which sounded like a word that means pretty in our language. I was so proud of that skirt that I did not think. The spear was in my hand, but I held up the skirt so the sunlight could shine on all of it. The girl jumped down from the ledge and came over to me and touched it. "Wincha," she said again. I did not say the word, but she wanted to hold the skirt, and I gave it to her. She put it against her waist and let it fall from her hips, turning one way and the other. She was graceful, and the skirt flowed around her like water, but I hated the aleuts and took it from her. "Wincha," she said. I had not heard words spoken for so long that they sounded strange to me. Yet they were good to hear, even though it was an enemy who spoke them. She said other words I did not understand, but now as she spoke, she looked over my shoulder toward the cave. She pointed to the cave and then to me, and made gestures as if she were making a fire. I knew what she wanted me to say, but I did not say it. She wished to know if I lived there in the cave, so she could come back with the men and take me to their camp. I shook my head and pointed to the far end of the island, away, for I did not trust her. She kept looking toward the cave, but she said nothing more about it. I held the spear, which I could have thrown. I did not, though I feared she would return with the hunters. She came over to me and touched my arm. I did not like the feel of her hand. She said more words and smiled again and walked to the spring and drank. The next morning she had disappeared in the brush. Rontu did not try to follow her. She made no noise as she went. I crawled back in the cave and began to pack the things I owned. I had all the day to do it, because the men were working and would not return to their camp before night. By nightfall I was ready to go. I planned to take my canoe and go to the west part of the island. I could sleep there on the rocks until the Aleuts left, moving from place to place if I needed to. I carried 5 baskets up the ravine and hid them near my house. It was getting dark, and I had to go back to the cave for 2 that were left. Carefully I crawled through the brush and stopped just above the mouth of the cave and listened. Rontu was beside me, and he listened also. No one could go through the brush in the dusk without making a sound, except someone who had lived in it for a long time. I went past the spring and waited, and then onto the cave. I felt that someone had been there while I had been away. They could be hiding in the dark, watching me. They were waiting until I went into the cave. I was afraid, so I did not go in, but quickly turned around. As I did so, I saw something in front of the cave. On the flat rock I used for a step. It was a necklace of black stones, of a kind I had never seen. I did not go into the cave, nor did I take the necklace from the rock. That night I slept on the headland at the place where I had left my baskets. At dawn I went back to the ravine. There I hid myself on a brushy ledge. It was near the spring, and from it I could see the mouth of the cave. The sun rose and shone through the ravine. I could see the necklace lying on the rock. The stones looked blacker than they had in the darkness, and there were many of them. I wanted to go down to the cave and count them, to see if they would make 2 loops around my neck, but I did not leave the ledge. I stayed there all the morning. The sun was high when Rontu barked, and I heard steps below me. The girl came out of the brush singing. She walked to the cave, but when she saw the necklace lying on the rock, she grew quiet. She picked up the necklace and put it down again and peered into the mouth of the cave. 2 of my baskets were still there. Then she went and drank from the spring and started it off through the brush. I jumped to my feet. "Tutok," I cried, running down the ravine. "Tutok." She came out of the brush so quickly that she must have been waiting nearby to see if I would return. I ran to the rock and put on the necklace and turned around for her to admire it. The beads made not 2 loops but 3. They were long and oval instead of round, which is a very hard shape to make and takes much skill. "Wincha," she said. "Wincha," I said after her, the word strange on my tongue. Then I said the word that meant pretty in our language. "Winchai," she said, and laughed because this was strange to her. She touched the necklace, giving the word for it, and I gave mine. We pointed out other things: the spring, the cave, a gull flying, the sun and the sky. Rontu was asleep, trading the names for them and laughing because they were so different. We sat there on the rock until the sun was in the west and played this game. Then Tutok rose and made a gesture of farewell. Mane, she said, and waited to hear my name. Wana Pale, I answered, which, as I have said, means the girl with the long black hair. I did not tell her my secret name. Mane, Wana Pale, she said. Pa say no, Tutok, I replied. I watched her go through the brush. I stood for a long time listening to her footsteps, until I could hear them no more. And then I went to the headland and brought the baskets back to the cave. Tutok came again the next day. We sat on the rock in the bright sun, trading words and laughing. The sun went fast in the sky. The time soon came when she had to leave, but she returned on the day that followed. It was on this day, when she was leaving, that I told her my secret name. Karana, I said, pointing to myself. She repeated the word, but she did not understand what it meant. Wana Pale, she said, frowning. I shook my head, pointing again to myself. I said, Karana. Her black eyes opened wide. Slowly she began to smile. Passe no Karana, she said. That night I began to make a gift for her, in return for the necklace she had given me. At first I thought I would give her a pair of my bone earrings, but remembering that her ears were not pierced, and that I had a basket of abalone shells already flaked into thin discs, I set about making a circlet for her hair. I bored 2 holes in each of the discs, using thorns and fine sand. Between them I put 10 olivella shells, which were no larger than the tip of my little finger, and threaded them all together with sinew. I worked 5 nights on the circlet, and on the 5th day when she came, I gave it to her, putting it around her head and tying it in the back. Wincha, she said, and hugged me. She was so pleased that I forgot how sore my fingers were from boring the holes in the hard shells. Many times she came to the cave, and then one morning she did not come. I waited for her all that day, and at dusk I left the cave and went to the ledge where I could watch the ravine, fearing that the men had learned that I lived here and would find me. That night I slept on the ledge. The night was cold with the first wind of winter. Tutok did not return the next day, and I remembered that it was near the time when the Aleut hunters would leave. Perhaps they had already gone. That afternoon I went to the headland. I looked over the rim. My heart beat loud. The Aleut ship was still there, but men were working on the deck, and canoes were going back and forth. The wind blew hard, and few bales of otter skins lay on the shore, so probably the ship would leave at dawn. It was dark when I got back to the ravine. Since the wind was very cold and I was no longer afraid the Aleuts would find me, I made a fire in the cave and cooked a supper of shellfish and roots. I cooked enough for Rontu and me and for Tutok. I knew Tutok would not come, yet I put her food beside the fire and waited. Once Rontu barked, and I thought I heard the sound of footsteps, and went to the opening and listened. I waited a long while and did not eat. Clouds moved from the north, covering the cold sky. The wind grew louder, and I made wild noises in the ravine. The wind grew louder and made wild noises in the ravine. At last I closed the mouth of the cave with stones. At dawn I went to the headland. The wind had died. Fog lay over the sea, washing against the island in grey waves. I waited a long time for a glimpse of Coral Cove, but finally the sun burned away the fog. The little harbour was deserted. The Aleut ship with its red-beaked prow and red sails had gone. At first, knowing that I could now leave the cave, and moved back into my house on the headland, I was happy. But I stood there on the high rock, looking down at the deserted harbour and the empty sea. I began to think of Tutok. I thought of all the times we had spent in the summer sun together. I could hear her voice and see her black eyes squinting close when she laughed. Below me, Rontu was running along the cliff, barking at the screaming gulls. Pelicans were chattering as they fished the blue water. Far off I could hear the bellow of a sea elephant. But suddenly, as I thought of Tutok, the island seemed very quiet.